This is why the country is going down the drain. Women like you. Irresponsible. I bet you don't even know who the father of those children is. Isabella felt her heart race as she held Miguel in her arms. The plane hadn't even taken off yet, and the tension was already thick in the air. Across the aisle, the sharply dressed man glared at her with a look of utter disdain. Mark Thompson, the arrogant CEO, barely concealed his discomfort with Isabella and her child being in first class. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom. Mark's words echoed through the cabin. Isabella Romero, cradling Miguel, felt the weight of each syllable hit her like a punch. Pain and indignation surged in her chest, but she remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor as she fought to keep her composure. Her son squirmed restlessly in her arms, unaware of the poison that had just been unleashed upon his mother. Mark settled back into his seat, satisfied with his attack, while the other passengers observed in uncomfortable silence. None of them knew who Isabella was or what those words would mean for Mark's future. But what he had just done would change everything. What would drive a powerful businessman to humiliate a woman so cruelly? What began as a silent public shaming would ripple through the world, and Mark's fate would never be the same. Before diving into the story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every day here, there's a story you can't miss. Los Angeles International Airport was bustling as usual. Isabella Romero, 6 months pregnant, walked alongside her 2-year-old son, Miguel. With each step, she felt the weight of travel fatigue and pregnancy pressing down on her. After 2 weeks visiting her family in Mexico, she was eager to return home. As she tried to soothe Miguel, who was starting to fidget, Isabella took a deep breath and glanced around, feeling out of place amid the lines for first class. Dressed in a simple t-shirt and worn-out sneakers, Isabella preferred to keep a low profile, away from judgmental stares. Married to Gabriel Romero, one of the most powerful magnates in Silicon Valley, she could easily surround herself with luxury. But she always sought simplicity, especially in moments like this. The trip back to Mexico was her time to reconnect with her roots, far from the glamour and opulence. On her way to the boarding gate, Isabella noticed the glances. Some sympathetic, others slightly irritated. People around her saw her as just another mother traveling with a noisy child. But she was used to it. This will pass soon, she thought, squeezing Miguel's little hand. At the same terminal, Mark Thompson, CEO of a rising tech company, strode purposefully. At 50, Mark was accustomed to navigating the world as if it belonged to him. His impeccable suit, Italian shoes, and luxury watch gleamed, reflecting the success he flaunted. That day, the flight to San Francisco was just another step toward closing important deals and solidifying his growing fortune. As Isabella struggled to calm Miguel, Mark approached the boarding gate. Upon seeing her, his gaze immediately turned judgmental. A child in first class. This just gets worse, he thought, rolling his eyes as he passed her with an audible sigh, clearly expressing his irritation. Flight 247 to San Francisco was announced, and Isabella, grateful for the priority given to passengers with small children, was among the first to board. Gabriel always insisted that she travel in first class, especially during her pregnancy, for comfort and safety. She settled into her seat, attempting to soothe Miguel, who was starting to show signs of fatigue and impatience. A few minutes later, Mark Thompson entered the cabin. His gaze immediately landed on Isabella and Miguel, and his discomfort was palpable. He approached a seat, irritation etched on his face, and rolled his eyes once more. Great, he thought. A noisy child to ruin my trip. Aaron Jacobs, a well-known social activist in his 30s, quietly took his seat in the row just behind Mark. He was returning from a lecture in Los Angeles on social inequality and prejudice. With over 5 million followers on social media, Aaron was an active voice against injustices and biases. He immediately sensed the tension in the air. Something about the way Mark looked at Isabella bothered him, and he decided to keep a close eye on the situation. The flight had barely begun when Miguel started to get restless. Like any small child, he was tired and fidgety. Isabella did her best to entertain him, offering his favorite toy and murmuring soothing words. But Miguel's discomfort grew, and he began to whine, unable to calm down. Mark, who was trying to focus on his laptop, let out a loud huff, clearly frustrated. He looked over his shoulder and shot a scathing glare at Isabella. "Can't you keep that kid under control?" His voice dripped with contempt. "Some of us pay good money for these seats to have a little peace." Isabella, visibly taken aback by the hostility, tried to remain calm. "I'm sorry, sir. He's tired. I promise he'll settle down soon," she said, attempting to defuse the situation. But Mark was not satisfied. He leaned forward, getting closer to Isabella with a cruel expression on his face. "That's the problem. People like you have kids you can't control, and then you decide to have more. And pregnant again? That's irresponsible." His words cut deeply into Isabella. She felt her face flush with embarrassment, but she held back the tears. She had faced many moments of prejudice in her life, but this attack in public hurt her more because of Miguel, who was beside her, defenseless. Aaron, who had been watching the scene unfold, felt the anger boiling inside him. He knew that this kind of behavior was a reflection of something much larger, something he fought against every day. Without drawing attention, he pulled out his phone and started recording the interaction. He knew this incident could not go unnoticed. With Miguel finally asleep, silence seemed to return to the cabin. But Mark was still not satisfied. He looked once more at Isabella, the contempt still evident on his face. And then, he unleashed the phrase that would change everything. "Women like you are the reason this country is going down the drain. I bet you don't even know who the father of those kids is." The cruelty in those words was like a punch to Isabella's gut. She looked at Mark, incredulous. Her mind struggled to process the malice of the comment. She wanted to respond, wanted to scream, but all she could manage was to take a deep breath and look at Miguel, who slept peacefully in her arms. "He has no idea who I am," Isabella thought. Aaron, still recording, felt his blood boil. But he knew the impact of this moment would be much greater if it was exposed to the world. He sent a message on social media, "Just witnessed something shameful. Stay tuned, this is going to blow up." During the flight, while Mark Thompson humiliated Isabella Romero, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin grew heavy, almost unbearable. Each venomous word from Mark echoed like a bitter refrain, and the other passengers, although visibly uncomfortable, largely remained silent. What could have been a peaceful journey quickly turned into a spectacle of public humiliation, but the fear of getting involved and the collective embarrassment prevented most from acting. As Mark's words grew more cruel, some passengers around Isabella began to squirm in their seats. There were disapproving glances cast in Mark's direction, but no one seemed willing to confront him directly. Many appeared frozen in the situation, caught between the desire to intervene and the fear of exposing themselves. The tension was palpable. Each time Mark spoke, the atmosphere became more charged. An older gentleman, seated a few rows ahead, turned to observe what was happening, his eyes filled with indignation. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. A well-dressed man treating a pregnant woman with such cruelty in front of everyone. Yet, despite his visible discomfort, he hesitated to say anything immediately, perhaps out of fear of worsening the situation or, like many, for not wanting to get involved in a conflict between others. Other passengers exchanged nervous glances. Some looked down, pretending nothing was happening, hoping the situation would resolve itself. The social pressure, the fear of getting involved in a public scene, and Mark's apparent power as a successful businessman intimidated most. After all, who was this man to humiliate someone with such confidence and without fear of repercussions? Many simply preferred not to be the ones to break the silence, even knowing the situation was wrong. It was then that an elderly man with grey hair, seated just in front of Isabella, could no longer contain his indignation. He had witnessed everything from the beginning: Mark's discomfort, the looks of disdain, and finally the cruel words that crossed every line. He slowly turned, his expression serious, and finally broke the silence in the cabin. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice firm but filled with experience and authority. "Don't you think you've said enough? This lady is just trying to travel with her child. There's no reason to treat anyone this way." Mark, still inflated by his own arrogance, looked disdainfully at the man. "And who are you to tell me what to do? Mind your own business." Mark's response was harsh and immediate, but the elderly man did not back down. "My business, sir," the old man continued, "is to do what is right. And what you are doing right now is definitely not right." The tone of the elder was firm yet calm. His posture showed that, despite his age, he was not intimidated by Mark. For a brief moment, the courage of the elderly man seemed to break the aura of invincibility that Mark had created around himself. The CEO faltered, clearly unsettled by the intervention. The silence that followed was heavy, as if all the passengers were waiting to see what would happen next. Other passengers watched intently. Some appeared relieved that someone had finally spoken up, while others remained still, unsure how to react. There was a palpable sense of discomfort, as if everyone was aware that something terrible was happening, but few had the courage to do anything about it. Some people began to murmur among themselves. A woman across the aisle whispered to her husband, "He can't be serious, a woman with a child." But despite the quiet conversations, no one besides the elderly man seemed willing to stand up to Mark. An attendant, noticing the growing tension, finally decided to intervene. Although she was trained to handle conflicts on board, this situation was different. It was a matter of personal humiliation and cruelty involving a visibly powerful passenger. She approached carefully, trying not to escalate the conflict but knowing she needed to do something to ease the tension. "Sir," she began, maintaining a neutral and professional tone, "let's try to keep calm, please. We're all trying to have a smooth flight. Maybe we can talk about this somewhere else." Mark looked at her with the same superiority he had shown towards Isabella and the elderly man. "Talk to her," he said, pointing at Isabella, not hiding his irritation. "She's the cause of all this." The attendant glanced at Isabella, who remained silent, holding Miguel in her arms. Isabella couldn't find the words to defend herself in that moment. She had decided that the best course was to not respond to Mark's provocation, keeping her dignity intact. The attendant turned back to Mark, realizing that any attempt to de-escalate the situation would be futile. He was determined to maintain control and did not want to hear from anyone. "Sir," the attendant repeated, keeping her composure, "we need cooperation from everyone to make this flight comfortable. Please try to calm down." Though her intentions were good, her intervention had little success. Mark simply leaned back in his seat, crossed his arms, and huffed in irritation, as if the very idea of someone asking him to calm down was an affront. For him, the conversation was over, not because he had calmed down, but because he considered himself too superior to continue discussing with the inferiors around him. After the attendant's intervention and the elderly man's attempt to defend Isabella, the flight fell into a tense silence. The passengers grew even more uncomfortable, some exchanging looks of compassion with Isabella, while others avoided any eye contact, fearing they would be dragged into the conflict. The sense of powerlessness was evident. Everyone knew that what had happened was wrong, but no one knew how to correct or remedy the situation. Isabella continued holding Miguel, who, oblivious to the chaos around him, slept peacefully in her arms. The elderly man looked at her with an encouraging gaze, and she simply nodded, silently thanking him for his attempt to help. He had tried to do what many had not, and for that, she felt grateful. Although the incident seemed to have reached a kind of uncomfortable pause, no one knew that the story would not end there. The silence in the cabin, where everyone, including Mark, thought the confrontation was over, would only be a prelude to something much larger, a public movement that would spread around the world. Mark's disdain, witnessed by everyone on that flight, would become the catalyst for the downfall of his own career. As the plane headed to San Francisco, the video recorded by Aaron Jacobs continued to go viral on social media. What had seemed like just another tense flight would transform into a storm that no one could foresee. And the consequences of this, for Mark, Isabella, and everyone else, were just beginning. The flight landed in San Francisco hours later. Isabella felt exhausted, emotionally drained. All she wanted was to get out of there, grab her bags, and finally embrace Gabriel. Hashtag, but fate had other plans. Mark, as usual, was one of the first to get up. He pushed his way down the aisle, passing Isabella with one last contemptuous glance. Finally free of this scum, he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. But when he exited the plane, he was met with a scene he could never have anticipated. Journalists, cameras, and flashes dash. A crowd awaited him in the terminal, and soon the questions began to fly. Mr. Thompson, is it true that you insulted a pregnant passenger during the flight? How do you justify your prejudiced and classist comments? Mark, dazed, looked around, not understanding what was happening. It was then that he saw the large screen in the airport terminal. There he was, captured in high definition, hurling cruel insults at Isabella. Aaron's video had gone viral, and the hashtag Justice for Isabella was trending among the most talked about topics worldwide. Isabella exited the plane shortly after Mark, holding Miguel in her arms. She was immediately surrounded by reporters, but the tone was completely different. Mrs. Romero, how do you feel after being disrespected in such a manner? A reporter asked, his voice filled with empathy. It was then that Mark heard the name Romero. He froze. Gabriel Romero Dash. He had spent hours insulting the wife of one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley. The blood drained from his face. Gabriel crossed the terminal towards Isabella. He embraced her tightly, kissing her forehead. When he turned to Mark, his gaze was one of pure contempt. You showed exactly who you are, Gabriel said, without raising his voice. The words were like a final blow to Mark, who realized in that moment that his career and life were about to crumble. In the days that followed, Mark Thompson's life fell apart. The flight video went viral within hours, and social media erupted with outrage. The public pressure on Thomptech, his company, was immediate. Shareholders demanded his resignation, major contracts were cancelled, and corporate partners severed ties. Within days, Mark was forced to step down as CEO, and his reputation, built over decades, was destroyed. For years, Mark had seen himself as untouchable, someone above criticism. But now, he was facing the direct consequences of his arrogance. Headlines spoke of the collapse of his career, and he quickly became a symbol of everything wrong in corporate culture: prejudice, arrogance, and lack of empathy. But Mark's fall wasn't just professional. His personal life took a hit as well. His wife filed for divorce a few months after the incident, unable to cope with the public humiliation and the loss of their social status. Longtime friends distanced themselves, and he soon found himself isolated, abandoned by those who once idolized him. 6 months after the incident, Mark, who had once commanded a billion-dollar company, was forced to accept a regular job. He had spent years building a successful career, but after losing everything, he had to take a position as a manager in a retail store. It was a shock for him, who had once been at the top of the corporate world, but it was also the only viable option left to him. The job at the store was not glamorous, and Mark was confronted with something he had never experienced: the reality of ordinary people. He, who had always looked down on others, was now on the same level as all the other workers, facing the same difficulties and challenges. The job required patience, something Mark had never possessed. Dealing with customers, handling complaints, and taking orders from younger superiors were humiliating experiences. But it was in this environment that he began to reflect on who he had become. At first, he resisted. He still considered himself superior, believing he was a victim of an unjust world. But gradually, the daily interactions with ordinary people began to change his perspective. He started to see the dignity in simple jobs, learning to respect the humility of those who struggled to survive without the status and power he had once prized so highly. Gabriel Romero was known in Silicon Valley as one of the most influential and respected entrepreneurs in the tech industry. At 42, he had built an empire with his technology company, becoming one of the most powerful magnates in the United States. His journey, marked by hard work, strategic intelligence, and cutting-edge innovations, contrasted sharply with his personal life, which he always preferred to keep discreet and away from the media spotlight. For Gabriel, family was a sacred pillar, and he had always prided himself on protecting Isabella and their children from the harsh realities of business and the social intrigues that came with his status. When Isabella told him about the incident on the plane, Gabriel was devastated. He couldn't believe that someone had humiliated his wife so publicly and cruelly. The very thought of Isabella, pregnant and caring for their small child, being insulted by a man like Mark Thompson made Gabriel's blood boil. Instinctively, his urge to protect his family surged to the forefront. He didn't just want justice, he wanted revenge. Seeing the video that had spread across social media left Gabriel feeling powerless, something he was not accustomed to as a man of his caliber. He was used to resolving issues with a phone call, a meeting, or a strategic move. But now, he found himself unable to erase the pain Isabella had endured. He knew the public lynching of Mark Thompson was already underway, with millions speaking out against the CEO's behavior. But that wasn't enough for Gabriel. "I'm going to sue him," Gabriel announced to Isabella that night after watching the video again. His eyes were cold and calculating, but his heart was filled with rage. "He will pay for every word he said to you. We're going to ruin him, legally and financially." But Isabella, who had remained strong until then, shook her head. "No, Gabriel," she said softly. "What he's going through is already enough. The virtual lynching is relentless, and I don't want to prolong this. He's already being destroyed. I just want to move on." Gabriel looked at her, surprised by her stance. Isabella was a strong, resilient woman, and he knew how much this had hurt her. Still, she didn't want any more suffering, even for someone who had treated her so poorly, in a way that made him admire her even more. But at the same time, Gabriel couldn't just let it go. "If you don't want to sue," he said, trying to control his anger, "then we won't do it. But I will ensure that Mark Thompson's life will never be the same again. He will feel the weight of his actions in every aspect of his life." Gabriel Romero was a man with powerful connections. Within days after the incident, he began to use his influence behind the scenes to ensure that Mark Thompson faced consequences not only in the media but also in his professional life. He made it a point to contact business partners, investors, and big names in the tech industry, warning them about Mark's behavior and suggesting that no one would want to be associated with such a controversial and publicly condemned figure. The shareholders of ThompTech, Mark's company, began to feel the pressure. With videos of the incident circulating on social media and the media harshly criticizing Mark's stance, public confidence in the company started to plummet. Gabriel, without making any visible public moves, maneuvered to have contracts cancelled, and several major tech companies began to distance themselves from ThompTech. Mark's image was completely tarnished, and he was forced to resign as CEO just a week after the incident. Behind the scenes, Gabriel worked to ensure that Mark had no more doors open in the business world. His connections in the industry ensured that any opportunity for Mark's reintegration would be blocked. When Mark Thompson's name came up in Silicon Valley, it was irrevocably linked to prejudice and scandal. Within a few months, Mark was completely isolated in the business world, a once powerful man now reduced to a pariah with no opportunities. As Mark struggled with the devastating consequences of his actions, Gabriel and Isabella moved on with their lives. The incident had only strengthened the bond between them. Gabriel, who had always been protective of his family, came to admire Isabella's strength even more, as she faced the public humiliation with a dignity that impressed everyone. After the birth of their daughter, Sophia, 6 months after the incident, Gabriel and Isabella decided to use the visibility they had gained for good. Isabella, who had previously preferred to stay out of the spotlight, launched a foundation dedicated to supporting immigrant mothers and women facing challenges similar to those she had experienced. The foundation provided financial resources, psychological support, and educational programs to help these women rebuild their lives. Gabriel fully supported Isabella's initiative. Although he was a busy man with business commitments, he made it a point to participate in the foundation's key decisions, offering financial resources to expand the organization's reach. Together, they built a support network that helped thousands of women and their families. In the eyes of the public, Gabriel and Isabella became a symbol of resilience, dignity, and justice. They continued to live a comfortable life, but always remained grounded. Gabriel, who had previously immersed himself completely in his business, began to dedicate more time to his family, realizing that despite his wealth and success, what truly mattered was being present for those he loved. Isabella, on her part, became a powerful voice for social causes. In various interviews, she spoke about the incident on the flight, not with resentment but with a message of hope and resilience. That experience taught me that even in the toughest moments, we can find strength within ourselves to move forward, she said at a conference on women's empowerment. And more importantly, dignity is something that no one can take away from you, no matter how hard they try. Gabriel and Isabella also decided to keep their children away from the spotlight. They knew that media attention could be overwhelming and wanted Miguel and Sophia to have a peaceful childhood, free from the pressures of being part of such an influential family. However, they occasionally shared family moments, always emphasizing the importance of unity and respect. As Mark Thompson fell deeper into disgrace, losing his career, status, and even his social standing, Gabriel and Isabella thrived both personally and professionally. Isabella's decision not to take the case to court demonstrated her compassion and resilience, while Gabriel, on the other hand, ensured that Mark would pay for his actions in other ways, making any chance of professional recovery difficult. For Gabriel, protecting his family was his top priority, and he knew that even without a lawsuit, he could use his influence to guarantee that Mark would never regain the same position of power. In the end, Gabriel and Isabella proved that silent strength and dignity can prevail, and together they built a future where justice was served strategically rather than vindicatively. Their post-incident life became a story of overcoming challenges, love, and unity, while Mark Thompson, a man who had once known the pinnacle of corporate success, was forced to confront the harsh reality that his words and actions had cost him not only his career but also the life he once knew. One afternoon, after a long day at work, Mark sat on a park bench, observing the people around him. He saw parents with their children, people who, like him now, were just trying to move forward with their lives. It was in that moment that he began to understand that life was not about power or status. It was about empathy, respect, and the ability to grow from mistakes. Determined to change, Mark began to engage in volunteer work. He started helping at shelters for the homeless, working with social inclusion programs, and for the first time in his life, he began to listen to others' stories without judgment. He learned about resilience, strength, and the true importance of human dignity. Mark's journey to redemption was neither quick nor easy. He faced rejections from society and himself. But gradually, he began to rebuild his life, no longer as the arrogant man who once dominated the corporate world, but as someone who understood that true greatness comes from within, from the ability to change, learn, and seek redemption. Over time, Mark Thompson's story became a cautionary tale used in corporate training, not as a lesson in success, but as a warning about the dangers of arrogance and lack of empathy. He became a reclusive figure, but his name was marked as someone who, after losing everything, found the opportunity to become a better person. Isabella, for her part, continued her path of success and growth. She founded an organization dedicated to helping immigrant mothers, and her story of resilience and dignity inspired millions around the world. Aaron Jacobs, whose recording of the flight changed so many lives, continued his fight against injustice, helping to expose cases of prejudice and giving a voice to those who could not defend themselves. Thus, the incident on Flight 247 left permanent marks on all involved. The fall of a powerful man, the rise of a strong woman, and the transformation of a life in search of redemption. This was the true lesson of what happened that day. And you, what would you have done if you were on that flight? Would you have stood up for Isabella, or would you have remained silent like most? Mark's behavior had consequences, but the question remains, what can we do in situations like this? If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any of the upcoming stories we have to share. Sure. Please provide the text you would like me to translate. Sure. Please provide the text you'd like me to translate, and I'll be happy to assist you. Sure. Please provide the text you would like me to translate, and I'll be happy to assist you.